Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am beyond delighted that we have such an incredible audience here today for the first annual Kamloops Summit on opioids and cannabinoid research. I say this is the first one because I hope today will inspire us as a community, as a group of health professionals, as husbands and wives and brothers and sisters and friends and family. We are all connected together in our community. And all of us, in some way, has felt the impact of opiates, whether we've lost a family member or been through troubles and times and difficulties because of the impacts of problematic substance abuse. I think we're all here understanding that the mission is critical and the time is now. As we look to the statistics of people in our community who are dying and who are harmed by problematic substance use, I believe it's important that together as a group of professionals, we come together, supporting one another, whether you're coming from a background in medicine or in nursing or in any of the biomechanical disciplines or as an allied health provider, whether you're a member of an academic institution or a researcher or a person who is deeply concerned with this problem and is here to learn, to become inspired and to help, you are welcome here. And I am beyond delighted that we've been able to sell out this crowd and that we have an extensive wait list of people who were behind you who wanted these seats as well. That tells me that we have an interest. We have an interest in making a difference and helping people to live better, to save lives, and to make a difference in the community that we live in. So thank you all for coming, for being an incredibly important part of this work. And I'll tell you, I had no idea back earlier this year in April when I was attending a conference in Toronto, I had no idea the incredible people I would meet, some of whom who will be on this stage here today. We have assembled a team of researchers and physicians and people involved in our community making a difference every day in the opiate crisis. And I think you will find today, by the time we're done our presentation, that you walk away with a new sense of understanding as to the background to the crisis, from different perspectives of government and of health and clinical applications. You'll have a better understanding of exactly what's going on and know the true extent of the issue and the problems that we're faced with. By the time we're done the second half of this presentation, I hope that your heart has grown. I hope it swells, and I hope there are more than a few tears in this room, because the second half of our education session today deals with the human impact. It deals with the real life stories of people in our communities who have been affected by this, and nobody is immune from this. And so today we come here with an opportunity to share with you not only the problem, but to inspire hope for change. Hope that as a group of people working together, we can make a difference together. I'm Michael Cohen. I'm the founder of the Cannsolve clinic here in town. It's a personalized cannabinoid medicine clinic and one of the first of its kind, where we work very extensively with different health providers in every discipline to help people to use customized cannabis formulations along with traditional therapies to provide a better than average response to people with very complex health problems. It is our intention through the efforts of research and of the work that we're doing here to help people to have better ability to manage their symptoms, improve their function, and ultimately to honor and enhance their quality of life. And by working together, I know that there is a great deal of positive good that we can do. We see it every day in our clinic, and as we get to the end of this presentation, I'll be speaking a little bit about some ways in which you might want to get involved in this work, and certainly to learn more about how we can help. My background started that here in Kamloops. I was one of the co-founders of the Welcome Back MRI and Pain Management Center. It's a multidisciplinary assessment treatment center, also featuring Canada's only dynamic upright MRI scanner. So health clinics and creating specialized responses to difficulties in health is kind of my breadbasket. It's my world. It's where I come from. And I'm extremely privileged to share the stage today with an incredible group of dedicated professionals. And I hope as we go through the day today that you will enjoy this experience as much as I have putting it together for you. And so to start things off today, I am extremely privileged to introduce someone who we all know quite well I think if you've been in Kamloops for some time, you've probably met this man and you've seen his smiling face and you've seen the impact of his work that he's done. I'm speaking, of course, about Terry Lake, our former health minister, who's been a champion for our community and also someone who has been at the heart of the opiate crisis in government working with this. And so in order to make sure I get all of his titles right, he is the very honorable Terry Lake. He's an amazing golfer, and not only that, but he's a heck of a lot of fun at a party. I think if you've ever been to a place where he's been, the smiles and the laughs are ongoing, and I'm awfully grateful that we have him. But officially, Terry Lake is the Vice President these days of Corporate Social Responsibility for HexoCorp, one of Canada's largest cannabis producers. He was also the BC Minister of Health from 2013 through to 2017, and he was responsible for managing the province's response to the opioid crisis, implementing many harm reduction strategies that are now used across North America. So please join me in welcoming the very honorable Terry Lake to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and welcome everyone to the Cannsolve Summit. And thank you, Michael, and your team for putting this on today here in our great community of Kamloops. And I just want to recognize our mayor, Ken Christian, is here today, and I know he has to leave in a little while to go find out the result of the Memorial Cup bid that we hope comes here to Kamloops. And I believe Councillor Donovan Cavers I saw in the audience somewhere too. So thank you for your interest in this. This is something that does affect our community, affects communities all across North America, and starting to affect communities in Europe as well. It really knows no borders. Let me just give you a quick 1-minute reason why I am now in the cannabis business. As health minister, I really didn't have a lot to do with medical marijuana, as it was known then. It was a federal government program. We were not really involved, and we had enough issues. We were thankful that it was a federal responsibility. But I was often asked, as the Trudeau Liberal government was elected in 2015, what I thought as health minister about the legalization of cannabis. And I said, well, listen, we know that Canadians, particularly young Canadians, are among the heaviest users of cannabis in the world. So people are using it now, and by and large, they're using an untested, unregulated product. And when I asked my kids, when they went to, at South Cam, what was easier to get, pot or booze, they said pot was way easier to get. So we know people are consuming it, and they don't really have an idea what they're consuming. So regulation, proper quality control, proper education, and research funding that goes along with legalization could only be a good thing. So that was my position then. About the same time, my daughter Stephanie, a South Cam grad who is at UBC at the School of Population and Public Health and works as a research associate for the BC Centre for Substance Use now, then was with the BC Centre for Excellence for HIV/AIDS, was starting to get interested in cannabis research, particularly as it related to other illicit drug use. And so she went to a conference in New York. She was presenting there. I went along with her, not as health minister, but as a proud dad to support her. And not only was I very proud of her, but my eyes were opened up about this very complex plant. The huge amount of science that is happening and will happen, and the huge challenge in a public policy shift going from an illegal substance since 1923 in Canada to a legal substance. And as someone interested in science, interested in health, and interested in public policy, all of those things came together for me. And when I decided not to run again, I got a phone call from my young friend Adam Miron, who went to TRU, worked on my mayor's campaign in 2005, and is a co-founder of then Hydropothecary, a medical cannabis producer. And he said, Terry, come and talk to us, and we'd love to have you join our team. Well, the rest is history. I've been a year at what was known as Hydropothecary, now known as Hexo Corporation. And the intersection of cannabis and the public health challenge of the opioid crisis is something I'm very interested in. And some of the people that are here today, I've learned a great deal from. MJ Malloy from the BC Centre for Substance Use is going to be presenting, and MJ is just a phenomenal resource And the whole BC Centre for Substance Use, which was set up while I was minister, is something we can all be proud of. It's the largest cadre of addiction specialists in North America, and they are putting policies together, practices together, opportunities for education together that will help all of us in North America get through this challenge. People like Bob Hughes. Bob and I go back a long time. We've been known to have a beer at the Red Collar once in a while. But working with Ask Wellness as mayor and then as MLA, I've learned a tremendous amount from Bob. And so many of you that work in interior health, that work in outreach, have all helped me learn about the needs of our population, our vulnerable populations particularly. So let's just take a look, step back at the crisis that we're dealing with here. I mean, this is, when you look at these numbers, it's just hard to believe. 70,000 deaths per year in the United States, every year. 4,000 deaths in Canada. In British Columbia, 3 to 4 people every single day die from opioid overdoses. That's more than die in car crashes. It's more than die in car crashes and murders combined in North America. Now think about if this was a disease like Ebola. And back in 2014, 2015, as health minister, we were dealing with the threat of Ebola coming to Canada. And I can't tell you how many meetings we had with the federal government, all of our provincial resources, with BC Ambulance, trying to figure out how we would manage if Ebola came to Canada. We did not have one Ebola death in Canada. Yet the resources that were ready to be mobilized to tackle that potential problem were far greater than we've seen for a problem that kills 4,000 people every year in Canada. How did we get here? Well, there's a lot of other people that know more about this will talk about this, but the consensus is that it's multifactorial, like so many things in life. There's an increased reliance on opioids and pain management starting in the 1990s, a big push from pharmaceutical companies to physicians, even to veterinarians, as I was practicing at the time, to use more opioids because untreated pain was considered to be rampant, and this was something that we had to address. So more and more people relied on opioids for pain management. There was problematic use following prescribed use, so people stayed on too long, or people who were not prescribed opiates found them in the cupboard. Children, young adults, if you like, were finding these. They became, something that became a recreational use. And when we were dealing with regular opioids, it was kind of a steady state that we were dealing with. But then we have fentanyl and carfentanil showing up in about 2014, and this changed things dramatically. In fact, if you take fentanyl out of the picture, the opioid overdose rate in British Columbia has been essentially unchanged. So this huge increase that we have seen is because of fentanyl mostly, and in some cases carfentanil. Very powerful synthetic forms of opiates that are tremendously effective in what they do. In fact, any of you that have had, a minor procedure like a colonoscopy may have had fentanyl. I can tell you, it's a wonderful drug. After my colonoscopy, my wife picked me up, took me home from Royal Inland Hospital. I laid on the couch. I had the best nap ever. It wraps its arms around you. It is a very powerful and intoxicating drug. But when it's added to other drugs, and people don't know they're getting it, obviously they're not getting it in a dose that's prescribed by a physician. And it, like any opioid, will attach to respiratory receptors on the brainstem, and all of a sudden you can't breathe. So this is what's going on. It's being mixed with heroin, with cocaine, with methamphetamine, but never, importantly, despite what some police and paramedics, and at one time our premier, that I had to correct her, said, it has not been found in cannabis. So here we were, if you look at 2010 to 2014, we had this about steady state of about 300 overdose deaths every year in British Columbia, and then something happened. So 2014, we were worried about Ebola, and we started to see this increase in overdose deaths. And Dr. Perry Kendall, Chief Medical Health Officer for British Columbia, became such a great mentor to me. And, he and I were really good colleagues together, and we used to talk all the time. I could call him on his cell phone, he could call me on my cell phone, we talk about these things, and I said, Perry, what's going on here? And, we really didn't know what was going on. But I said, well, most epidemics burn themselves out. If you have a virus, a bacteria, if you have some sort of epidemic, usually it goes through this typical curve and then plateaus and starts to burn itself out. And I said, is that going to happen here? He said, yes, Minister, I think it will. Because they'd seen something similar in about 1998 in the street drug supply, and it kind of burned itself out. But when we got to the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, we realized this was not burning itself out, despite a lot of avant-garde approaches that were happening here in BC that were not happening anywhere else. Now this is a map, and it was created to show you the huge increase in opiate overdose deaths in the province of British Columbia. If you look at the pale colored areas, that's where the overdose rates are low. Red is very high, and this map, should it function the way it's supposed to, was very, very white at the beginning. And each year it got redder and redder and redder till we get to 2016, where there's more than 20 overdose deaths per 100,000 population in these health service delivery areas. And it wasn't just downtown East Side, it was everywhere. It was Surrey, it was Richmond, it was Delta, it was Kamloops, it was Kelowna, it was Prince George. And these are the stories. The public often had this idea about, drug users, they're marginalized people that, are addicted, and while, there are supports in place, that was something that, social services looked after, the health ministry looked after. Wasn't something that really impacted everyday families. That was kind of the attitude that we often encountered. And then we saw that it was impacting everyday families. This is Paul Adkin, Kamloopsian, 27 years old. He was at a wedding in Kelowna, and as 27-year-old young males tend to do, had quite a bit to drink. And talk about a gateway drug, of course we know alcohol is the biggest gateway drug ever. And it changes the decisions you make. But Paul and his friends made a decision to go to the hotel room and do some cocaine, which, again, lots of high-functioning, everyday Canadians use cocaine. They don't expect to die. But the cocaine they were using was cut with fentanyl. And I think 6 of the 7 overdosed, and Paul passed away. And that touched many people in Kamloops. But it was one story. There were many, many, many stories. Leslie McBain lost her son in 2014 to an overdose, and she started an organization called Mom Stop the Harm. And she has been a true campaigner for a more robust response, particularly federally, to the opioid epidemic. She came with the Premier and I to Ottawa to appeal to federal cabinet ministers to increase the federal response. But these are more faces of British Columbians that have died because of the opioid epidemic. So, when we realized this was not normal, this was not going to just look after itself, despite, as I said, British Columbia has one of the largest opioid agonist treatment programs in the world. While money is always an issue for every government, we felt like we were putting enough resources into this issue historically. And we were out in front of the pack versus every other jurisdiction in North America, historically. But we knew that wasn't enough. This was different. And so In April of 2016, Dr. Kendall and I decided to declare a public health emergency under the Public Health Act. And that gives powers to the provincial government to do things that they normally wouldn't be able to do. First of all, it brings a lot of public attention to the issue because the biggest thing is awareness. People aren't saying don't use drugs. We know people are going to use drugs. We know that strategy never worked. Just say no, it doesn't work. So what we said was if you're going to use drugs, be aware of what you're using. And don't use alone. And get some naloxone, the drug that knocks that opiate off the respiratory receptors and allows you to breathe again. And so that helped bring a lot of attention to it. It allowed to provide real-time information so that we could see what was going on. We could actually find out if there was a bunch of overdoses happening here in Kamloops, for instance, then BC Emergency Health Services knew about it right away. They could deploy resources faster than finding out about it 2 days later, as was the case before. We increased the interventions, like the amount of naloxone that was being distributed. We pushed the federal government to deschedule naloxone, so you didn't need a prescription. We worked with the College of Physicians and Surgeons to allow that to happen, and with the College of Pharmacists to allow that to happen. And we set up an opportunity to identify even more actions, including setting up a joint task force on overdose prevention and response. So you see the Premier there, and there's Leslie and Dr. Kendall. This was at St. Paul's Hospital, where the BC Centre for Substance Use is. Evan Wood, Dr. Evan Wood, the head of the BC Centre, is there. And this was really bringing together health and public safety so we could identify as many actions as possible to address the situation. So it was centered on a bunch of different areas, but there were 7 key areas. First of all, the immediate response, then prevention, public education, awareness, monitoring, surveillance, and applied research, pushing the federal government for legislative changes, improving federal enforcement and interdiction strategies, that was the public safety part of it, and helping the police understand what their role is to help people through this situation. So, as I said, we expanded naloxone availability, and you can see the naloxone kits here. But we also looked at supervised consumption services, and not just the traditional supervised consumption services that had existed at Insight for 12 years, the only supervised consumption service in all of North America, by the way. And in 12 years, the evidence was overwhelming that there were public health benefits from having this supervised consumption service. But also looking at someone like Sarah Blythe. Sarah's an activist downtown East Side, and she just decided that, you know, government's not working fast enough. I'm just going to set up my own supervised consumption site. But she called it an overdose prevention site. And Sarah, in a little pop-up tent in the downtown East Side, started having volunteers trained to use naloxone, inviting people, if they were going to be injecting drugs, come here and use, and then if there's a problem, we can help you. So I went downtown East Side and met with Sarah. And it was a cold winter that year, 2016. You can tell, this is downtown east side of Vancouver, and this is late October, early November, and it was cold. And it just made sense, like the bell just rung in my head, like here's someone that's out in front of government, saving lives. So I'll come back to Sarah's story in a minute. What else did we do? Well, we established the BC Centre on Substance Use. I mentioned one of the largest centers in North America for addiction training, research. And importantly, to build bridges between the treatment sector and the recovery community. Typically, the response to addiction is a 12-step program, abstinence-based programs. BC championed harm reduction, and so these worlds often lived in separately. And they didn't talk to each other very much. And as a politician, that's a problem because there were other politicians in my party that said abstinence is the only form of treatment. And I had to really convince them that what we were doing with increasing harm reduction strategies actually could go along with abstinence-based systems as well, if we could get these two worlds to talk to each other. So Marshall Smith from the recovery community, Evan Wood from the BC Centre of Substance Use, really built bridges together so that now a lot of people that still want to use a recovery-based system will at least acknowledge that harm reduction is an important part of that strategy as well. We also did a fentanyl detection pilot at Insight. We did a huge public and professional awareness, and Leslie helped us with that. We got the federal government to change some federal legislation around pill presses, for instance. We got them to empower the Canadian Border Services to search for small packages that may contain less than 30 grams of fentanyl, which is enough to produce a lot of overdoses. But they can just come in the mail, and if they're under 30 grams, they're not inspected. Well, now they have the ability to inspect those. We also added treatment beds. We added outpatient treatment, no-cost access to opioid agonist treatment, methadone, Suboxone, to low and moderate income earners. We increased supervised consumption services, and in Kamloops, Bob and his team helped with that, and we worked with IHA to develop a mobile service, and the overdose prevention services. I was laying in bed in a hotel in Victoria when we were in session in the legislature, and I woke up and I was cold in my room. And in Victoria, I mean, I'm in a nice hotel room and I'm cold, and I just started thinking about Sarah and her team, the downtown east side, and thinking about people on the street. If I was cold in my hotel room, how were they managing the situation they were in? And here was this person helping people on the street while I, as the health minister, laying in my bed trying to get warm, thinking about this. So that morning, I got all the health authorities on the phone. I told Perry Kendall, Perry, we're going to set up overdose prevention sites across the province. And Perry was like, well, really? Yeah, that's what we have to do. I told the Premier's office, if I don't hear from you in half an hour, I'm just going to do this. And to their credit, they said, Terry, you do whatever you need to do. We've got to get on top of this. So I got all the health authorities on the phone, and within days, we had overdose prevention sites across the province. Something that was technically illegal. It went against the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the federal legislation. But I phoned the federal health minister, told her we were doing this, and to her credit, Minister Philpott said, you know what, we'll figure out a way to make this happen. And we did. Now, that has saved thousands and thousands of lives across the province. It hasn't solved the problem, but it's helped save lives across not just British Columbia, but across Canada now, because we have overdose prevention sites across the country. We just had a BC coroner death review panel earlier this year, because what's happened is it has plateaued, but we still haven't seen that curve drop down. So they said we need to regulate and appropriately oversee treatment and recovery programs, provide evidence-based quality care. Let's have some real evidence-based quality care, not just a hope and a prayer. We need to expand access to evidence-based addiction care across the continuum, including increased access to opioid agonist treatment, including injection opioid agonist treatment like injectable prescription heroin and other opiates that can be administered in a medical fashion. This is a medical problem, not a criminal problem. They also said there's a need to improve safer drug use. And Dr. Mark Tyndall from the BC Centre of the Disease Centre, BC Disease Control Centre, has been a big champion of this. We need to make sure that we can check drugs, but we should be providing safe drugs. If people are going to use drugs, let's at least provide something that's safe. We've got to keep people alive before we can do anything else. So, what's the update? Well, numbers are stabilizing in British Columbia. Hopefully that's the plateau. Hopefully that's the plateau. But in Ontario, the numbers are growing. And with the election of the Ford government, Conservative government in Ontario, they have put a moratorium on more overdose prevention sites and even the renewal of the funding for the existing overdose prevention sites. They want to gather evidence of efficacy. I haven't had a phone call yet. MJ has not had a phone call yet. I've told them I'd be happy to talk to them. The evidence is there. Lives are saved. So activists and public health officials, of course, have been in an uproar, as they should be, with the Ford government. There were over 1,200 crosses put on the lawn of the legislature this week, representing the number of Ontarians that will die this year. They were all taken down the next day. So this has been one of the biggest challenges of my life. But I was just the guy in the chair. This is something that all of us need to be seized with. We need to make this something that our society needs to deal with. It's not up to the Minister of Health or the BC Centre for Substance Use or Bob Hughes. It's up to all of us to understand the problem and look for the best way to solve the problem. Let's use evidence. And one of the promising things, one of the things that has attracted me into this industry is the ability to look at other options. And we're going to hear about cannabis as an exit drug. Not as a gateway drug, as an exit drug. And I want to be careful that we don't overpromise. There's always the temptation to say that cannabis is going to solve everyone's problems. It's not, folks. It's not. But is it one more tool that we can use? I think there's some promising evidence that it is. So I want to say thank you to people. There's MJ, he'll be up after me, I believe. Sarah Blythe. Philippe Lucas, who was one of the founders of the Victoria Compassion Club so many years ago and now has been doing great work with Tilray, one of Canada's largest licensed producers of medical cannabis and now recreational cannabis as well. He'll be up here. And Hilary Black, who founded the Vancouver Compassion Club over 20 years ago and does a lot of social responsibility work on behalf of Canopy, the largest cannabis company in the world. So this is an industry that is not just out there to make money, although it will. It's an industry that actually wants to give back to our society and make us a better country and solve some of the problems that we're seized with at the moment. Finally, I want to say thank you to my daughter Stephanie. She's in Edmonton today. Whenever I talk about my kids, I get all choky. Don't get me talking about my dog, I'll really just go off the stage. But Steph is a remarkable young woman that's making a big difference. She's in Edmonton today at a conference talking about these sorts of things, and she actually works with MJ. MJ's her supervisor, but she is my inspiration. We all need to inspire each other. Thank you for being here today.
Wow, what a wonderful start to today's presentations. Terry, thank you so much. If it wasn't said before, I would once again add the honorable part. I am so grateful that you came here today and provided for our audience an opportunity to have unique insights into the way a government body thinks about things from both the bureaucratic sense, but also with a tremendous amount of heart, and to reveal some of the really influential people involved in saving lives on the front lines. And I want to really acknowledge in particular that you started with an evidence basis and you connected that to the heartfelt reality of lost lives. And you found a way to work through the government to put your will to making change so that we have some of the resources and abilities and opportunities that exist today. And in your work through the new corporation with Hexo, I know that you're also continuing that great work in assisting people to live better lives. So thank you for being the first person here today to speak